Let's get the brakes released and throttle up here. Everybody ready? All right. So we're here today to talk about effective leadership practices for airport professionals. And I am joined today by Corinne Nystrom from Falcon Field, Arizona, and Cory Hazlewood, VP with C&S Companies. So we're going to go through our presentations relatively quickly to try to stay on track time-wise. I would encourage you to write down questions and have some questions for us on the back side. And then we'll go as long as we can possibly go before we are shown the exit so that we can get ready for the next event. Okay. So as far as slides go, can I just call the slide out from the back?
There's a slide advancer up there.
That's very helpful. Yeah. Next presenter, please.
Leadership Challenge 1.
Yeah, Leadership Challenge 1, technical. Okay, just a quick organizational development slide just to let you know how we are organized. Everybody has different organizational structures on the public side. Spokane Airport Board is an airport authority that was formed by the City of Spokane and Spokane County back in 1962. They appoint a 7-member board who hires me, and I am responsible for running Spokane International Airport, a small hub airport that just went over the 4 million total passenger mark last year, and Phelps Field, a very busy general aviation airport with a contract tower, which is very important to the conversation that I'm going to have with you today. That's a quick view of Spokane International Airport for those of you who have not had the pleasure of visiting yet. And Phelps Field as well. So I want to talk to you a little bit today about your Goliaths. Everybody's familiar with the David and Goliath story for the most part, and want to talk with you about what your Goliaths are and talk a little bit about one of the Goliaths that I had to face as a leader and how it worked for me and my organization. So when you confront your Goliaths, what do? An outsized challenge that you have at your airport or your company, or if you're a consultant working for a client, what do? Do you respond or not? Do you decide to play by the rules, or do you follow your own instincts? Do you persevere, or do you give up? Do you hide behind governance structures? Say, well, you know, my board or my city council or my county commissioners won't let that happen. Do you hide behind the org chart? Do you say, well, you know, I'm too far down in the org chart to be making any difference in how we tackle this big challenge, this big Goliath? Or do you hide behind a budget? Say, you know, we just don't have the money to, you know, to lead that effort or to do those things. Or do you make some other excuses up? Think about that. There is great value to be had out of dealing with the Goliaths, what I call lopsided conflicts, or situations or adversity, the big challenges that you have. And to point out that giants, whether they're problems or people, are not what they think they are, but even more importantly, they're not what you think they are. Being an underdog can change people, can change you and your organization. And in my judgment, it creates opportunities to make possible things that you could not have otherwise seemed even imaginable. So as we're talking about this, I want you to think about, what are your Goliaths right now? You should have probably at least 3. And if you don't, I'd be very surprised. And you probably have more. So talking about the Goliath that I went through and the leadership lessons that came out of it, for us, was a Budget Control Act treatment called sequester. You may recall back in 2011, sequester was adopted in a Budget Control Act between Congress and the Obama administration, and the idea behind that was to make things so draconian and so bad that it would force them to reach budget agreements, because if they didn't, the across-the-board cuts would be terrible because they would be defense and non-defense programs. Well, guess what? Despite that language, Congress and the Obama administration could not agree on a budget, and sequester was implemented on January 1st of 2013. It was delayed slightly by the American Taxpayer Relief Act, which was a very short-term Band-Aid, but ultimately that ran out on March 1st. As I had mentioned, sequester was across-the-board budget cuts, so that means DOT and FAA. FAA's response in part to sequester was to propose to close 150 contract towers within 30 days. Is there anybody in this room that has a contract tower? That's what I thought. Phelps Field, the contract tower that I talked about that we have, was on that list of 150 towers to be closed. And there's a picture of the Phelps Field contract tower. So the leadership moment for me was, what do we do? And it required a CEO assessment of the situation. And in those situations, you have to be proficient. The totality of your knowledge, skills, and abilities, your KSAs, really comes to bear in situations like this. So the message is, no matter where you're at in your organization, you must master your profession for moments like this, because you do not have time to go back and read an advisory circular, an FAA order, or your textbooks, students. So you have to understand the technical aspects, the regulatory aspects, the legal aspects, the political aspects, and this one might surprise you, but also the ethical and moral aspects of what you're dealing with. And as I mentioned, there's speed that is really critical in all of this as well, because as you know, the clock started ticking with the FAA, 30 days to do something. And so if you haven't heard of the OODA loop, I would encourage you to research it. The OODA loop is how we won the first Gulf War in 3 days. And it's how you get inside other people's decision-making loops and find a strategic advantage to solve your problem. So the components of the OODA loop are observe, orient, decide, and act. So if there are any fighter pilots in the room, most of the fighter pilots will tell you in aerial combat, the OODA process will only leave you with seconds to make those decisions, and that's really where this comes from. So again, having technical proficiency, your totality of your knowledge, skills, and abilities, and the need to move quickly. The CEO and the leader is responsible and accountable. And those are two words that are very, very important in this process. The CEO, in my case, responsible for clear decisions about purpose, so being able to explain the why, and strategy, the how. And even more importantly, the CEO is accountable for all outcomes, positive or negative. Wow. Hang on. There we go. So before I go to the next slide, I'll just tell you this, is that I went to my board and I said, I know this is going to sound crazy, but we have to sue the FAA. Immediately. So the board said, wait a minute, Larry, aren't those the people that give us money? I said, yes, they are. However, remember, there's the people that give us money part of FAA, and there's the air traffic organization part of FAA, so that goes back to technical proficiency, right? Understanding how the FAA works, how it operates. And I had said, we can sue the FAA, and everyone will know we're not really suing the airports side of FAA, we're suing the ATO side of FAA, even though it's all one organization. So I think we can do this. And it's going to be expensive, by the way. And we also have to figure out how to do all the other things we have to do while we go through this process. But I made the conclusion, going back to the ethical and moral issue, that if the FAA followed through with that decision, people would die. And I would not have that in my community. As the chief public official responsible for aviation in my community, I could not tolerate that from a moral or ethical standpoint. So I had to go home that night after the board meeting and tell my wife and daughter that I had made a very important decision, and that if I failed, I may get fired and may not have the ability to work at this level in my profession ever again. And I can tell you, there were people who called me up and emailed me and said, "Are you out of your mind? You're going to be emptying trash cans at the Salt Lake City airport when this is all said and done." So the consequences were significant, not only for my employer, my organization, but also for me as an airport professional. So we sued the FAA on March 6, 2013, Spokane Airport Board versus Huerta. You can actually find that case if you're interested. I went to a public event in Washington, D.C. and stood up in front of over 300 of my peers and asked Mr. Huerta, who was at the event personally, to stop this nonsense and to stop playing games with people's lives with regard to this proposed closure. No one else asked that question. Maybe some of you were there and heard me do that. I spent a lot of time advocating and educating elected officials at the federal level, and I spent a lot of time communicating with the media at the local, state, and national level, including a national TV appearance. And then, of course, we did a lot of outreach to other federal control tower program airports and our trade associations to educate and advocate for them to consider joining the effort. The lawsuit proceeded with briefs and arguments scheduled in early May. And after our efforts, over 40 airports ended up joining that lawsuit, along with the two trade associations, AAAE and ACI-NA. Now remember, when I did this, I was in a hurry, but I also created two parallel strategies, a legal strategy and a political strategy. And the idea behind creating the legal strategy was to provide time for the political strategy, because the political strategy was the right strategy, although I would have loved to have argued the case because I think we would have prevailed. So again, pushing that forward, we were able to work with the House and the Senate, and right at the end of April, the House passed the Reducing Flight Delays Act. The same day it was introduced, by the way. Think about that now. The Senate followed suit on April 30th, and the President signed it May 1st. So as a result, the lawsuit was dismissed. The Federal Contract Tower Program has become one of the most well-known, popular, and easily funded programs among aviation programs on Capitol Hill. It is a rallying point for the U.S. Contract Tower Association and its member airports. As you walk into Capitol Hill offices these days and you have a contract tower in your district, that member, whether they're a senator or a House member, knows about it and supports it. We actually were able to get prescriptive language in the appropriations bills now that basically prevents the FAA from touching the contract tower program and also funds it at historically high levels. So again, probably one of the most well-known grassroots efforts in recent times in aviation with regard to that program, and continues to have overwhelming support. So conclusion on that for you is how you develop yourself as a leader is really a microcosm of how you're going to develop your team, your department, your organization, your knowledge, skills, and abilities. Actually build capacity in your organization for taking on those future Goliaths. And we actually had one pop up not that much longer after this, because the FAA went around and tried to actually close contract weather observing stations. So we went after them again. And one of the FAA officials told a congressional staffer it was like sticking their head in an anthill. And so, again, very important, that you build that capacity in yourself and in your organization to take on those Goliaths. And again, requiring technical, legal, political proficiency, relationships and communications expertise, building those relationships with your elected officials, your board members, so that they trust you to make the call when it's time for you to make that call and jump off the cliff. Ethical and moral strength, physical and mental endurance, responsibility and accountability. All those things go into what we just talked about and the outcomes. So I want you to focus on this statement. The more we consciously and systematically process ethical dimensions of our decision-making when confronting our Goliaths, the more responsible we become and more accountable that we are. When you boil down the situation with the contract towers to what really needed to be done, and you put it through an ethical lens, the decision was quite simple. It had to be fought, and it had to be fought aggressively. And that's what's expected of us as airport professionals: logical, principled, and comprehensive justification for the things that we do. So, what are your Goliaths? How will you respond? Will you play by the rules? We didn't. We couldn't. There wasn't time. Will you persevere? Would you be willing to make a decision that might put you at risk professionally, that might change the course or trajectory of your career? Or are you going to play it safe? Are you going to give up? Are you just going to shrug your shoulders and say, well, you know, I can't do anything about it, that's just the way it is. Sequester, sequester. I guess they're going to close my contract tower and 150 others. And it's really too bad if people die. It's unfortunate. You going to hide? Well, my board won't go for that. My city council won't go for that. Don't have enough money. We spent probably about $300,000 on the litigation, by the way. Or will you decide to lead your organization and maybe the entire industry and profession to a new opportunity or to a new place to make what seemed unthinkable or unattainable possible? I hope you enjoyed the quick walk through what was a very difficult, time-consuming, challenging, and life-changing experience for us at Spokane Airports, but I think also for the industry as well. I think next up we'll have Corinne do some speaking. Thank you. And they have this clicker.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to do something that most of you probably don't expect me to do. I'm actually going to come down here. Half of you can't see me, which is fine, because I want you to focus on the slides, actually. So I'm going to talk with you about leadership from a slightly different perspective, which is probably good, but you're going to find that there's a lot of things in my presentation that Larry has talked about. So look for those commonalities, and Cory probably will too. You know, when we were all little kids, we probably all had some hero and somebody who we believed in that could be the superhero that would come in and take care of all of the issues of life and save the day, whether it was Superman or whether it was Wonder Woman or whoever. We all had that vision of somebody. But then as we got older, we kind of began to realize that, you know what, there really aren't any true Supermen or Wonder Women out there. It's actually, we're dealing with human beings, and human beings are awesome. We are smart, we're creative, but we're not perfect. And so what I'm going to talk about today, we've got lots of leaders in the room already, but I really do want to focus a lot on, especially those of you who are students, or maybe those of you who haven't reached the leadership position that you'd like to get into yet in your profession. But thank you for the rest of you for listening to it. All right. So the first thing you want to look at, what does a leader have? I've got a slide up there, but I'm going to actually preface it with something. Do you have a passion? Is there something in your life that you're really passionate about? Now, I can tell you right now, a lot of the people in this room right now, probably the vast majority of you have a passion about aviation. And that's going to be my main focus, but I also, if you have another passion that you really have, maybe you're going to end up doing something with that someday. So some of these things we're going to talk about as a leader are going to apply to you. So just think for a second, what am I passionate about? Just take that. Now, somebody who has a passion is ultimately going to have a vision about that passion. Whether it's, I want to take this airport to the next level of safety or appearance or acceptance by its community or more air service or whatever. Or maybe you're just wanting to write a book about aviation. I'd love to write a book about the history of aviation. So that's your vision. It's a vision. Once you have that vision that you're looking out into the future, your next step is to say, how am I going to get there? Now, people have been thinking about getting out into outer space since the beginning of time. But it wasn't until the 20th century that we finally came up with the technology to actually accomplish that mission and get people into outer space. First, it was just going out there with chimpanzees. Then it was going to the moon. Now we're exploring Mars and a lot of other places. So they've had the vision for centuries. They just didn't have the ability to define the mission and actually make it happen. Now, you can have a great vision, but if you don't share it with others, it's going to go nowhere. It's going to stay right there with you. So if you really want to achieve that vision, what you're going to want to do is share it with others. Find other people who share the same vision as you. Now, once you do that, there's a few things you're going to have to deal with. First of all, in order to get to that vision, again, it's something that may never have been done or that you've never done yourself. You have to be willing to do things differently than the way it's always been done. How many of us have heard that before in our office and in our work environment? Well, it's always been done this way. Okay, well, great. That was great then, but is that good for what we want as we move forward? Okay, so challenge that. Don't be afraid to get outside of your comfort zone and go, well, I've never done this before. This is really scary. It's like, okay, well, are you going to die most of the time if you get outside your comfort zone? Most of the time you probably won't. You may suffer a few failures, but most of the time that is not the end of the world. So get outside of your comfort zone and dare to imagine. Dare to imagine, what would it be like if we did this? What would be different? What would be our next goal beyond doing what we want to do here? Now, you have to make a commitment first before you can expect anybody else to make a commitment. If I say, yeah, I think this is a great idea, why don't you guys go take care of that? You think you're going to get on board with it? Probably not. You as the leader have to have that commitment yourself. You need to be willing to go the extra mile to get the job done. And sometimes that's doing things that maybe you really don't want to do. Or maybe you think somebody else should be doing it, but they're off doing something else. So guess what? I guess I'm going to do it. So you need to be willing to do that. Now, I put this picture up here for a specific reason, and it's not because I've got a quote from Abraham Lincoln there. This picture is very telling. You got Abraham Lincoln there. This is at the beginning of the Civil War. Does anybody know who that guy is that's kind of standing there kind of like this in the middle of the picture? That's George McClellan. General George McClellan, very highly trained, considered to be very competent. He was the first general that Abraham Lincoln assigned to lead the Army of the Potomac to address the issues with the Confederate Army under the leadership of Robert E. Lee to basically keep the Confederates from taking over Washington, D.C. Now, through several failures, Lincoln ultimately had to sack Mcclellan. Why? Well, because Mcclellan was basically all talk and no show. He kept saying, oh yeah, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. But ultimately, when the rubber met the road, it didn't happen. And so Lincoln finally had to just can him and say, you're not getting the job done. So what did he do? He went through a couple of other generals that kind of pretty much did the same thing. But then he heard about this general out in the western reaches of the Civil War, which was out in Kentucky and Tennessee and out there. Somebody that nobody had really heard of before, a guy by the name of Ulysses S. Grant. And he heard about Grant, and he said, well, wait a minute, this guy is out there, and he's actually moving his troops, he's actually taking over some towns, he's actually pushing the Confederates back south. Maybe we need to bring him to Washington, so that's what he did. And the rest of it is history. Grant is the one who ultimately got the job done and ultimately defeated the Confederate Army. And what was he doing? He was leading through action. He wasn't just sitting there. Today he's looking at the map, but he's probably looking to see what's our next move here. What do we need to do next? And sometimes when that happens, as Larry mentioned, you're not going to be the most popular person in town. And people are going to go, what are you thinking? What are you doing? And that's where you as leaders are going to have to learn, and you may learn it the hard way, but you need to learn, you need to be comfortable with yourself and say, I know what I believe, I know who I am, and even though people can criticize me, I'm still who I am, and I'm still comfortable in this little shell called my body. Something we deal with all our lives, actually. You also have to have a keen sense of what's going on around you. Really wish we had 360 degrees of eyes around us, because that's what leaders need. They need to be aware of what's going on around us all the time, and they need to still be doing that, but focusing on the big picture. Always focus. You've got all these other people that are like looking down here or looking here, but your area is this, and everything that's going on behind you. And you need to be able to learn to anticipate what's going to happen next. Because next is right around the corner, and if you're not anticipating that, you might get caught by surprise with something you can't deal with. You need to understand what those pitfalls and challenges might be. And you need to know where are those landmines. Where are those landmines out there that can really create a problem for us? Now, sometimes you're going to hit a landmine, or you're going to have a grenade thrown at you, but you need to hit it head on. You need to say, okay, this obstacle's been thrown in our face, how are we going to deal with this? One way you do not want to deal with it is sticking your head in the sand and trying to ignore it and say, well, if we just don't think about this or we don't address it head on, maybe it'll just go away. Well, guess what? 9 times out of 10, what ultimately happens if you do that is it blows up in your face. So hit it head on, even though sometimes you might be shaking in your boots. I don't know, if you were nervous when you were going in front of, yeah, absolutely. It's not like you are Superman, you're still human. So, but don't let those obstacles stop you. Always stay focused on your target and on that vision. Now, that means, and Larry mentioned it, you're going to have to be resilient. Again, you're going to have to be comfortable with who you are. You're going to have to be patient, and you're going to have to be willing to persevere, because sometimes it takes a long time to get your vision accomplished. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to be 2 or 3 Instagram messages worth or a couple of texts going back and forth. It's going to be a long, long time in some instances. But look at here. I love this quote. Basically, it says, when you put the stream and the rock together, guess who ultimately wins? It's the stream, because the stream is patient. It takes its time. And guess what it does over a long period of time? It creates the Grand Canyon. and all of the beautiful canyons that we have in the southwestern United States. You also don't need to know everything, absolutely everything there is needed to know in the aviation and airport profession. But what you do need to know is you need to know the area that you're working in. You need to be very competent at that because you're going to get a lot of questions about it. But you don't have to know every single thing. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, who was ultimately appointed by Franklin Roosevelt to be the commander of all of the armies that were going to be invading Europe on D-Day, guess what? Eisenhower never fought in a single battle. Eisenhower never spent a day in combat. But he knew what the big picture was, and he knew the job that needed to be accomplished, and most importantly, he was selected because he knew how to build relationships. And I'm not talking about being drinking buddies with everybody. I'm not talking about spending Christmas Eve at everybody's house. I'm talking about those professional relationships that are going to help you get the job done. That's what Eisenhower knew how to do. He knew about those bomber folks. He said they know how to get their job done. You need to help people understand we're all accomplishing the same mission here. We're all on the same page. And in this room, we all love aviation. It's common ground we have. We all work as a team, and as far as leaders are concerned, there is no one-man show. A leader is not a one-man show unless you're Frank Sinatra or somebody in Las Vegas, but even he had to have a band behind him to help him out. And importantly, it's also important for you to be loyal to that team. Once that team is together, you're together. You're like brothers and sisters. You're going to stick it out through thick and thin to get where you want to be. And you care about them. They're human beings, they're individuals, they have families, they have loved ones, they have hopes and they have dreams, and know what those are. You need to be honest with people. Don't feed them a line. If you don't know the answer, tell them, I don't know the answer, but I'll find out. If you don't know what the ultimate outcome is going to be honest with them. Say, I don't know what the ultimate outcome is going to be. And then, as Cory mentioned, you need to be accountable. If things don't go the way you originally planned, you say, we tried, we didn't accomplish it, what's our next move? Because I'm going to accept responsibility for what just happened. Let's move on. Let's move forward. And don't get hung up on it. Occasionally you need to rein in a team member or two. Maybe they get off on some tangent either intentionally or unintentionally. And you need to rein them back in so that the other group that's moving forward to accomplish the vision does not get sidetracked with that. So a leader has to do that. That's one of the toughest things that leaders have to do, is pull somebody back in. And once you've got that team put together, you stand back and you let them do their job, because they know what they're doing. They probably need for you to have a general oversight of what the big picture is so that they can focus on the various facets of getting those missions accomplished. But what it boils down to ultimately is you got to have that passion for what you're doing. You have to believe in it. You have to say, this is important to me, and I want to make a difference here because of this. And that's where leadership all starts, wherever your passion is. This last quote, and then I'm done. Mother Teresa, of all people, said it, I think, very well. She said, it's not about how much you do, but how much love you put into what you do that counts. And I see people in this room who every single day are putting love into what they're doing to make the airport profession the best airport profession and the best airports in the world. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cory. Okay, so I've never had the opportunity to present to adults on leadership, and I was flattered to have the opportunity to be here today to talk. I did present to a bunch of high schoolers about 6 months ago about leadership, and it went okay. So you guys are in for a ride. A couple things I'm going to share today a little bit is some experiences, much like Corinne and Larry shared, but also a little bit, a couple of Goliaths that I've faced in my career, and then some things that I've been fortunate around the teammates and other leaders that I have followed that have given me opportunity to take those and move those forward, and what we've done in our business to help continue to build leadership within. So these are just a couple. This is probably my only informational slide that you guys can take, but there's some good information on here. My experience in working in the consulting and the construction industry is that I've had a variety of individuals to be around, and not whether I've been managing them, whether I've been involved as a teammate or a member of the team, but all different ages. And there's a lot of that going on right now in the business, and people are seeing it, and it's all about being flexible. One of the key things that I got out of here is that you got to help them learn. There's a lot of information that you can pull from people that have been around for a long time, and even individuals that may be ready to hang their hat up and be done in the industry that want to think of ways to help and mentor the younger staff. How do you get those folks involved, and how do you make sure that they're getting that information over to your younger generation? This was a slide that I thought was really interesting as somebody that has a lot of millennials coming up in the organization. A lot of times we talk about, oh, millennials want to be the boss. They want to be the higher level. Well, if you see right here, 4% really want to get to the top of the organization. I thought this was very compelling. In addition to that, the 19% of working with great people I thought was very valuable. So I took a lot of this, and this was from another leadership course I had the opportunity to attend, and I took this slide, basically took that from the individual presenting. But the other key thing was making a positive contribution. And I've been fortunate to have some great teammates, and you'll hear a little bit about some of the opportunities that I've had to work with those teammates. But one of the things that I've noticed is that 28% is very accurate, and I've seen it even more, and I've had opportunity to work with folks that have pushed it past that. There's probably more of those individuals in organizations than just 28%. And I know the money is important. Millennials are looking for that, and I think a lot of it has to do where we live. We're the Southwest Trapo. It's not cheap to live in the western part of the country. Houses and everything else cost money, so the millennials are very, they're paying attention to what their value is and what value they're bringing to the organization. So September 14, 2005, I had an opportunity, whether I liked it or not. I was working for, a design build firm. I had an opportunity to go out to Biloxi, Mississippi, and I had never been to the South other than to New Orleans on a trip about 4 years before that with some friends. So I had no idea about what the Bible Belt area looked like in Biloxi. The opportunity was Goliath. There was obviously a major catastrophic event that had happened, and it was like a war zone. These were pictures actually right around the time that I had gotten there. And I happened to be a young project manager that was assigned a project to work on the parking garage and some of this area here that you'll see. This was the barge section of the Hard Rock Hotel. Hard Rock Hotel was supposed to open, and unfortunately it wasn't able to open because Katrina had hit about 5 days before it was planned to open. So there was quite a bit of challenge in front of us. And one of the reasons why I was sent there was some issues with individuals not getting along, individuals that might have been on the wrong seats of the bus, and trying to figure out where we could start and where we could finish. There was no time to write contracts. There was no time to figure out how much things cost. It was basically as quickly design build as you can go because the insurance carriers were writing purse values for certain sections of the project. Then at the same time, the developers were still trying to figure out how they could get along and pay for certain things. So the first thing when I did get there was to figure out, okay, I'm a young project manager, what do I do? Well, I got to figure out who's who and keep my mouth shut and just listen and learn. So the first meeting I show up to at 10 o'clock that was scheduled, everybody shows up late. And one of the guys who happened to ended up being a good friend of mine at the end of the project, looked across the table and says, "Oh, you're from California." And I said, "Yeah, I'm from California." I said, we like to show up to meetings on time." That didn't go so well. But what was important was to figure out who had the value in the room. One of the things that was brought up by one of the individuals that was a superintendent/foreman was, hey, why don't we just start working with the architects over there that are over on the trailer and start designing, working with them and start flushing things out now while they're designing it. They're sitting over there working on things, they're designing things, they're not telling us what's going on. We're cleaning things up, but there's no collaboration. I went, oh, that's brilliant. Let's make that happen. So, I mean, design build has evolved a lot in the industry, but at this time it was real design build. So we sat around the table and we started flushing out design pieces, and we took phases and quadrants. But it was because I listened to that individual and a couple other individuals that I was able to gain momentum and figure out, okay, let's get those architects over here, let's get these engineers over here, and then let's start to work on these particular pieces. And those two foremen, their superintendent and the foreman, both created value for the overall project that was immense. So it is all about getting the right people on the bus, and it's all about listening, showing up, taking what you can as a sponge, and then moving that forward. So it was exciting. We ended up opening the project in 2007. I did not get to see it finished because I had joined CNS after that time, and I was done living down in the South, basically. This is just a slide, self-awareness. Sometimes you have to realize when you get there that you are just the box, you know? And one of the things that, although I was empowered by my boss to go out to the South, and I was put in charge of a significant project, I still needed to realize that I'm the new kid, I'm young, I'm gonna go into a room with a bunch of Southern boys that are of all different ages, that have a lot of things to probably tell me, and I'm just gonna shut up and listen. And I needed to realize that that was my role, was to go in there and absorb what I could and be smart about it and intentional. And it was successful. We had our challenges, and I'll talk a little bit more about how you can't always plan for those challenges, but the project was done. I did hold my ground in a lot of situations as best as I could. Responsiveness, you know, when you get emails in your career and you get information that comes in, if you don't have an answer, you don't need to answer then, but you need to let that person know that you're working on it. That's one of my biggest peeves in our company is when you get an email from a client or a customer, you may not have the answer at that moment, but you need to respond to that client, let them know, hey, I got your information, I'm working on it, I'll get back to you by tomorrow. Because you guys never know, you know, airport owners or other owners don't ever know if that email actually got there and if that person got it. So it's very important. Responsiveness was huge. Taking responsibility, I made a few mistakes where I had pulled the trigger on moving forward with some drywall work in some areas that weren't quite ready because we hadn't dealt with the mold remediation in those areas. But I was getting pushed by somebody else on schedule, i.e. the developers, and we ended up having to pull those areas back. Cost us some money, I owned it, told the team that I owned it, and it was a mistake that we made. And then at the end of the day, when I was done this project, we shared the lessons learned. We got together, we talked through some of the issues and some of the things that we learned on my portions of the job, because the next guy that was taking over the 3 other sections was going to be able to gain that momentum moving forward. So fast forward, 2012, I had a project at San Diego International Airport. It's a warehouse facility. You've probably heard me present on it in the past. It was a P3 project for the airport, first ever that the San Diego International Airport had put together. The real estate department had worked on this a long time ago. I think even when Judy was in the real estate department at San Diego, they were planning for this project. But what this was it was a receiving distribution facility for the new terminal that was going under construction. So they went out for a P3 developer. I got a phone call from that particular developer, and we put together a team. Definitely in over my head. We put together what was an integrated project delivery team. We figured out who we wanted on that team, and we ended up pushing it forward. There was a lot going on in my career in terms of other airport work that was going, but I was taking this project on as an owner at the time. And one of the things that I had was a right hand. And this girl, this young lady to the right here, her name's Carly Shannon. She was my right hand on this project. And she had been with us for about 4 to 5 months, and she just kept raising her hand saying, I want to take more, I want to take more. And I empowered her to take more and to take more. And I took the risk, because I had taken the risk on taking the job, because this was a pretty good sized job. It was definitely a P3 in the eyes of the airport. There was a lot of emphasis and energy around the discussions on how this project was going to go successfully, and there was a lot involved. Not to mention, I had started my career with the Airport Authority, and this was the first job that I had as a consultant or as a construction manager for the airport, so it was really important to me in terms of my reputation to not let this job fail. So Carly was very passionate, and we talked about passion, about sustainability. So she said, hey, we have to meet the requirements of meeting LEED Silver on this job, because that's what the airport board has required. But I think we can get to gold. And I'm like, okay, well, we can get to gold? All right, well, let's not say anything yet. Let's just figure out if we can get there first. Well, we got to the point where we started talking about it in open forum, and we had to go in front of the board and say, we can get you gold. And the day that she sat there along with the developer and told the Airport Authority board that we could get to gold, I was very nervous. I don't think I slept very good for a couple nights after that. But we ended up getting there. We got to gold, and we delivered the project. It was a nationally recognized project. It was also, we won some local chapter awards for construction management. We did an integrated project delivery, so there was a lot involved. And I really, thank her for that. And to this day, I still thank her for all the work that she put in delivering that project and making sure that we met the requirements of the airport and made the airport look substantially well in terms of their sustainability efforts at the airport. This was just an inspiring quote. Colin Powell, I've always followed him in terms of I've read one of his autobiographies. If you haven't read one, he's got a lot of good information. He's been through a lot. Just wanted to share that with you guys. This is another one I thought would be of value. Being the college professor. So as a supervisor or as a teammate or a partner or a quality control person, you need to be involved in what's going on around with your teammates. And this is just an image of some red line drawings, but showing your younger team that you're still in the weeds and that you can roll up your sleeves and get involved in the project will go very far. And folks that stand back and let the team roll up their sleeves and move forward, that's good. But at some point, you have to jump in and not jump in aggressively and cavalier-like, but jump in, take the time, and offer support. I sometimes get a little bit disgruntled when I see folks come in, or teammates of mine would come in and redline things and have a lot of open-ended questions. Questions are great, but questions without guidance are not that helpful. So think about that. If you're in the opportunity to QC something, ask the question, but offer some support to those individuals, or maybe have a debrief discussion on why you asked those questions. I know what the vision is for the individual by asking those questions is to try to generate them to be thoughtful and start to think for themselves. But at the same time, when they're coming up in their career, they don't know which direction to go, and they may not know how you're asking the question. So guidance is so important. So this is something that I pulled from another leadership training, was being the college professor in your organization is very important. People always like their college professors, some don't, but if you're a good college professor, they will like you. This is something that we have done in our organization that's been very effective, is day one, you come on board, you have an opportunity. It's not forced, but it's talked through about mentoring. And what that looks like in our organization is, it's available through our link system, but we pay close attention to who's doing this, at least in the region that I'm responsible for. I make sure that individuals have the opportunity to have mentorship. And whether they have a mentor for a technical piece of the business or whether they have a mentor for career progression. I like to see the mentorships at 2 different levels. Doesn't mean you need two mentors, but for year number 1 technical mentorship might be more important than year number 2, where you want career progression, and you may want to glom onto somebody that's higher level in the organization. The other thing we do is we don't allow mentors to be individuals that are responsible or overseeing those individuals. So even if you're 3 removed, it's still not a healthy way to have a mentorship, because there's a lot of things in those mentor discussions that people want to ask, and they're fearful if there's 3 layers up and they're asking silly questions. So try to figure out a way to detach that from your organization. And when I think about this as it relates to the airports and folks that have, that are airport sponsors that are managed by municipalities, maybe there is somebody that's inspirational in public works, or maybe there's somebody over in Parks and Rec that you can line up with your younger folks. And it doesn't mean that they're having a lot of frequency of discussions. 4 times a year connections will help those individuals. But it's your job to find out where those individuals are within your organization. We've had a successful few years. I wanted to brag a little bit. 2017, 2018, 2019, we got Best Places to Work. And I was at first in 2017 when somebody introduced me, I said, oh, what's that? It's just a media play. Well, it is, yeah, of course. But I will tell you that it has done very well with the younger generational folks coming into our organization when they see that and they interview for positions within our company, because they look into that. And it's very important to them to know what the culture is within your organization. Not that our culture is perfect. We all have our flaws, but we're trying to do things to make our business a better place all the time, whether it includes a kegerator, whatever, right? But when we went through the office rebuilding in San Diego, Michael Hoteling, who's our senior vice president, and I talked through a lot of things, and he had some different thoughts on things than I had. But I was closer to some of the younger millennials, and he was very supportive and open-minded to that, because he understood that I was getting information from what was important to the millennials that he may not have. And just because he had his thoughts, he knew that that wasn't going to go well, because that's just what you have to do. You have to be flexible and open-minded. And he was supportive of things that didn't always align with our culture as a corporation. And sometimes you have to be open-minded about that. And we're proud of that, and the team in San Diego is very proud, because we do have a good culture. We'll play some table tennis every now and then on the conference table, and we'll do some things outside of work. And the team is so connected that those hard conversations that you have in business are much easier. They're much easier when you have a conversation of friendship amongst your peers within the business. This is the last thing. This is a New Zealand team, rugby team, and I took this also from some leadership coaching, was sweep the shed. And I don't know if anybody knows what sweep the shed is. All right, cool. Basically, this is what Southwest does. You see the captain on the airline cleaning the seats, right? So I have pushed this heavily in the western region of our practice, and it came from the president of our company, is that everybody should sweep the shed. If you show your team that you're not afraid to get the broom out and clean the shed, it says a lot. And after every game, the best players on this team, the worst players on this team, they all sweep their own lockers. And they clean their own lockers, and they don't wait for the fields crew to come in and do it. They do it themselves. And so what we have done is when we have events or things in our office, we will all participate in doing, cleaning or sweeping the shed. If I have an event at a certain thing, I'm not allowing my marketing person to just set that up. I will support and jump in and help. If there is some type of opportunity where it's an event that I don't really need to go to, but no one else is going to go, then I sweep the shed. I will go. No job in our organization is below you. And I have pushed that pretty heavily with our team, and it's done really well. People are starting to catch on board with it. I think the biggest thing is the younger generational folks, the millennials, have always been more on board with that. And I think when you show that to them and demonstrate them, they definitely appreciate that. So that's all I got. Thank you.
I think we have some, try to do some quick Q&A, if there are any.
I have a question. What factors do you consider most when planning, when preparing your team for the future?
What factors do you consider most in planning or preparing your team for the future?
So the question was, what
factors do you consider the most when preparing your team for the future, for future challenges?
I like to consider individuals not always technical strength, but individual personalities. And when preparing a team, you will have technical strengths. So there may be an individual that's technically strong, but may not be, a strong social leader. And you can marry that person up with a strong social leader. So when preparing teams, I tend to move things around intentionally. And a lot of times what I would do on let's just take a runway project. There may be individuals that have not worked on a runway project but are really good drainage engineers, and I want to get them involved on a runway job, but I'm not going to put them as the second tier or deputy PM on that job. I'll put them down, and they will be working on not just the drainage but other pieces of that project, so it'll allow them to be involved. So trying to get folks to be as diversified in their business practice as possible.
So just a quick follow-up, and I think 2 words that you need to take away: situational awareness. Very, very important for the leader to connect the team to the bigger picture. Again, as I talked about in my presentation, the why of what we're doing, and making sure that they understand what that is, because all efforts have to be directed towards achieving the outcome that you're seeking. But the situational awareness of your team is very important, and the leader has an obligation to make sure that the team is connected and has that situational awareness.
And I would agree with both of those. It's understanding who your team players are and who is going to be the best person to accomplish a certain part of the mission, and then you put that person on that particular part of the mission. So understand who your team players are and work with them and bring out the best that you can in them, because they'll take care of the rest.
Other questions?
Thank you.
I think at this time we'll go ahead and wrap up this session. Again, let's give a round of applause to our panelists. We're going to be coming up on our general membership meeting and our lunch. And again, as a reminder, we'll need everyone to clear out of the Cypress Ballroom. Please take your things with you. For about 5 to 10 minutes, the hotel staff will be setting up the tables and setting up everything. We'll call you.